talking about AI replacing the workforce, I often tell people that, just like you walk a dog, right? In this case, we'll treat the dog as artificial intelligence, right? The dog should never walk you, right? You walk the dog. Just like that, our profession should never think that AI is going to walk us, right? We have to govern AI, right? But in order to do that, you have to understand the beast here, right? If you don't understand AI, guess what? You're never going to walk the AI. AI will always govern you.
Welcome to the BIM Heroes Podcast. On this episode, we will be discussing the state of project management technology, and I'll be joined by Dylan John. Hello, Dylan.
Hey, what's up, man? How are you?
Good. Usually I start off with some introductions, so I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my name is Dylan John. Interestingly, I actually have a third first name as well. So I'm David Dylan John, but everyone in industry and all my friends call me Dylan. So that's my name. I'm the guy with three first names. I am originally from the beautiful island nation of Sri Lanka. Often misunderstood or thought to be someone who hails from the great nation of India, but actually slightly different on my end. I come from the small island that's just beneath it, and that's the beautiful nation of Sri Lanka. So that's where I hail from. I came to the United States in 2011. For those who may be aware of the Rotary Club, Rotary International in the state of Georgia sponsors about 50 students each year from different parts of the world with the purpose of propagating peace. It's somewhat an ambassadorial scholarship. So that's what brought me to the United States. And it's a one-year scholarship where, you're immersed and there's a lot of programming for interaction with the folks here in Georgia. So we do ambassadorial efforts like going to different schools or groups and talking about our country and so on. So that's how I actually got here in 2011. I went through school in a small community college called Middle Georgia College, started with civil engineering. And something about my general, sense of interest was leaning me more towards kind of the business management side of things. So my father was a general contractor in Sri Lanka, medium scale, large scale, commercial type construction activities. So I grew up in that environment, Sunday mornings going to church and then going and visiting job sites. So I always had this interest in construction, but I think more on the business side of things because I'd watch my dad crunch the numbers, figure out where to send the labor. There's so many moving parts. So in Sri Lanka's industry, you typically have, and of course it's evolving, but you typically have either civil engineers or architects kind of playing the role as a construction manager, not so much a specific profession. So I wasn't very in tune with the role of a construction manager. So I joined a civil engineering program at Middle Georgia College, and then I transferred to Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Georgia, where I then began going into the construction management program because I'd finally found this program that brings the best of both worlds, the engineering mindset along with the business management. There's just a lot going on. So got into the Georgia Southern bachelor's program for construction management, did that till I graduated. And then all of a sudden, towards my senior year, I started finding this whole passion for construction technology. Started with a BIM course where I had to do a BIM plan, an execution plan assignment for one of our courses. And I was like, yeah, this is interesting. Let me kind of get into this. And I started diving into construction technology. And before you know it, about a year later, I was doing my master's degree in also in construction management, but now with a construction technology focus. So I guess those are kind of the elements to me. I started with civil engineering, went into business management, construction management, found a little bit of an additional passion for construction technology. And that has brought me here today where I work for a company called Rycon Construction. We're a general contractor that operates all around the United States. I think we have 8 or 9 offices. I work for the Atlanta division, so I work here in Atlanta. And I also am an adjunct professor for Georgia Southern University. So I wear 2 hats, one of a project manager and a construction technologist with Rycon Construction, and that of a teacher with Georgia Southern University. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you for that. And what do you think in a day in a life of a project manager? How has that changed over your career so far?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think the baseline is communication, right? Project management, that's what you do. So it's communicating with different stakeholders, communicating with your team, communicating with your sub partner, especially in a general contractor perspective, communicating with your owners. So I have typically, I think when I started, I would see internal huddles, kind of figuring out where we're at, and then moving on to ownership huddles like OSA meetings or whatever, when you have those in the mornings or the afternoons. And that's kind of what my typical day has been is, okay, communicating depending on who it is. So you don't, it's sometimes very difficult to pause and do a lot of work for yourself because it seems like you're in multiple meetings, you're figuring things out, where we're at, what are we doing, updating schedules, cross-checking budgets. And you have all these moving parts. So as I think from the time I started in the construction industry, back in Sri Lanka when I was in construction, we were doing a lot of things with paper. I mean, there was little to no device usage, right? Besides just printed papers. Coming here to the United States, as I started, the first company I worked for, they had started using Proco. So there was some exposure that I had through college. And I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. We're doing project management on this platform. And I think it's transitioned in a sense where we take all the communication, we're trying to keep it in one unified place that is now digitally accessible is, I think, kind of the overarching goal, at least on my projects, where I try to keep everything as streamlined as possible in one location. Right now, I think when I started in the industry here in the US in 2018 to now, even in that short span of time, I've seen such a huge advancement because technology is advancing pretty rapidly. I think we were more in silos in 2018 than we are now. We're kind of breaking some of those silos, but we're still siloed. I think there's still a lot to be done in that environment. But I think that's what I've seen change in I guess, our day-to-day management seems to be a little bit more digitally entrenched. Still a lot of discomfort with, some folks not being aware of how to access the data or, may not have the right credentials or not really know how to navigate. So some of those things are still very, very visible and very evident from when I first started. But I think what I have now got into a rhythm of, so usually Atlanta traffic is bad, right? Super bad. So when I hop in the car in the morning, driving to the office, I've kind of carved out that, 40, 45 minutes of time to do check-ins with my superintendent. So at the moment, I have 3 running projects. I have 3 superintendents. So I'll call them up, kind of see, hey, where are we at? Of course, there are days where, one project may be taking more precedence than another. So you may only get through to 2 superintendents and then have to kind of do a check-in later on. But that sets the pace for my day. It's like, okay, these are what I'm dealing with. This is where my job sites are at. I'll then do, as soon as I arrive at the office, I'll kind of go through some of the photo albums, kind of see, okay, where are we at? Tools like Evercam have been very useful to kind of do a quick spot check of, okay, what's happening on site right now. So now that's real time, right? So that's also useful data and information. And then once I've kind of got a good understanding by about 9:30, you're now starting to move into more the documentation, the email follow-ups, the submittals, the RFIs, where are we at, working through the budgets. Of course, you'll have a meeting here, meeting there, with your subcontractors or owners, your sub meetings and your owner meetings, the weekly ones we have. And then it's kind of working through the process. So hopefully by the time you hit lunch, you've got a general snapshot of where you're at and you've got some action of, okay, where are we headed? And then after lunch, it's almost trying to make sure we're switching out fires and getting ahead of things. And it's kind of the process and you repeat, right? So that I would say is kind of the day-to-day. in my life as a project manager, but I think from an evolution standpoint, digitalization has definitely helped to try and keep some of that communication streamlined. The biggest challenge I sometimes see is the people aspect of it, right? Who may not be fully fluent with using those tools. And sometimes I find myself, or even my teams, like my APMs, working on having to train folks on how to leverage or use those tools, right? So that also has now become part of the day-to-day project management. Is you're walking a subcontractor through how to fill something out or review something or access something, troubleshooting the access to the drawings, so it's some items like that as well, I think, has been different to what I was experiencing when I first started.
And on that same note, what is the state of project management technology as you see it today? What are some of the products that you see that are changing the industry? What are things you feel like is starting to, go away?
Yeah, so I think Proco for me has been a great tool, right? And I think part of it is the way in which a lot of tools kind of integrate with Proco and allow us as project managers to have a little bit more of liberty and freedom with the tools we use. Even in terms of tools like Evercam, or we also use another 360 documentation tool called ConstructN. So all these things being able to interface with Proco is a very critical aspect of how we operate, right? Again, talking about having this singular platform for things to come. Now, I think Autodesk 360 or now Construction Cloud, right, as what they've evolved to, is also an interesting, comparable, competitive tool. I haven't used or played around with it as much on my projects. However, I've seen some benefits to it, but I also think there are some downsides from my perspective, just because of how it seems like some of the tool access limitations are a little bit more restrictive with Autodesk products as opposed to, Proco. I recently also came across a tool called Jet Build. For smaller GCs, I think, who may not have such an enterprise impact. And quite honestly, I don't want to speak for a software without playing around with it too much. But what I saw with Jet Build was also a very interesting interface. In some of the assignments I have to do as an adjunct professor, I have to consult for some smaller companies. So when they're unable to kind of take on something the size of Proco for an integration, I've always, routed them to, hey, maybe you want to try out a tool like Jet Build and see how, your workflows play around. And then you can kind of figure out where it is and what that relationship looks like. So I think from a project management side, those are three tools that I have seen and liked. Again, each with their own advantages and disadvantages. Of course, at Rycon, we use Proco, and I'm 100% a Proco advocate. I think it's a wonderful tool. As long as you use it, right? As long as you use it to the max impact. I have seen some other tools, not a big fan of some tools like eBuilder. I do note that a lot of I think sometimes when you're working with jurisdictions or larger enterprises, eBuilder seems to have captured that market in the front end. So sometimes from a workflow perspective, you are now having to use eBuilder because, a lot of these governmental organizations or different large enterprises have used eBuilder. And again, nothing wrong with it. They have good workflows, good systems, not as user interface, I guess, proactive as I would see with a tool like Proco, Autodesk, or Jet Build, just from my perspective. So I think eBuilder is there as an existing giant. I'm not really sure I'm all on board with their innovation speed, if you will, right? And then Kahua is the other tool that I'm somewhat aware of. Again, not used it, reviewed it initially. Again, I don't think it's a comparison to Proco, but nonetheless, I'm aware that they're there and haven't used it to really talk too much to it. So I would say those are like the project management platforms I've been exposed to.
Yeah. Similarly, it's going back to what you were saying on the design aspect of it, project management. I think that a lot of the designers like to use products like BIM 360 because it's integrating with their overall arching design products. I've also seen Newforma capture that market. You see a lot of designers like Newforma and then that connector with Procore. Which leads me to this next question for you, which you brought up briefly in the responses so far, which is the education aspect of it all. So obviously, we've got the education of people in the industry and also the education of people in schools. What do we need to do on both fronts to get this type of technology education more on the front end, and then when they come into the industry, how we can pick it up from
That's very interesting because I started teaching about maybe a year and a half ago. I'm actually going into, I think, my second, a year and a half. I think I'm about on my second year, starting this fall. So, fall of 2024. So, when you look at education tools, I think in some instances, it seems like some larger software companies took their foot off the gas pedal, right? Actually, that was some of my concern with Autodesk products because I had Autodesk enriched tools being used in my courses, and the amount of troubleshooting I had to do in order to kind of keep students focused on the Autodesk products and kind of working through it. And Autodesk wasn't, in my opinion, not too helpful in getting some of these things resolved in a timely fashion. I actually started exiting using Autodesk as entrenched in my courses because for two reasons. Number one, I think there are so many other tools that are coming out that I didn't want to limit my students' perspective into just Autodesk products, right? But number two, when a student is playing and trying out a software, you want to make sure they also have the support to learn. And if they don't have it, then I think there's a gap there. Now, on the flip side, I've seen a lot of advancements in the education space. I mean, that's one of the things I'm most impressed about Proco. I mean, Proco's at it, from a training standpoint. A lot of material. It's almost like there's no excuse to be able to learn and access certain modules and really self-teach yourself. Now, that's all well and good, but I also want to kind of back up to a student perspective, right? Students don't often get, when you're in industry, you have context of, okay, I have to coordinate my MEPs that goes above the ceiling. This, you have a context of sequence. But when you're a student, of course, some of the students and many of us in construction, we get into construction because our families have been in construction, right? So there's a little bit of context, but also, you may not have really delved very deep into the nitty-gritties of how we do construction. So what I have noticed is I think we're providing a lot of tools, and this is something I'm also trying to work on improving on in my course, is I give my students resources so that they can self-teach, right? But I'm also trying extremely hard to try and see how do you connect the context of why you use these tools and how you use these tools. So when we're talking about construction technology and I think the education aspect of it, I do think we have a ways to go especially from the software vendor side of things, to improve education or construction technology education and training modules where people who are learning it can almost come into it from no context and try and understand, why is this scenario relevant, right? Just doing a video on XYZ sometimes doesn't help. I would like to say I learned it from Jesus himself when he started teaching through parables, and in one of my preliminary modules, even just to help my students understand the construction technology environment, right? I tried to simplify it and correlate it for some context to a dining room. So how I explained it is I tell my students that, hey, your project management softwares are your dining table, right? The construction technology environment is the dining room. Your individual and independent software that may do extremely well at a specific topic like job site reporting, photo documentation, in this case, because Evercam is one of your sponsors, we'll call them out, right? And Evercam or any of these tools that do one specific or multiple functions, I treat them almost as a dining chair, right? So can you use the dining chair without the dining table? The answer is yes, right? But it's better when you use that dining chair in integration or in cahoots with the dining table, right? So I try to give them that visual that, okay, hey, Procore is your dining table. You bring Evercam, Construct N, Revit, any of these things as dining chairs. And then we talk about, okay, well, now there's this AI thing. Where does AI, sit in all of this? So I've kind of mapped that out for my students to kind of imagine it in the sense of AI is the diner who comes and sits on the chair, recognizes the structure and everything that the chair has to offer, and then really and truly interacts with the table, right? So you now have an intelligent form seated on a dining chair interacting with Procore in a dining room. Now you have your construction technology ecosystem, right? Now, I've gone to that extent to try and teach my students so that they can contextually analyze and understand, oh, this is what the construction technology environment is. Because when they see my course and it says BIM, right? They Google BIM and they understand BIM as a singular component, but BIM has now, BIM is a cornerstone, but at the same time, it's grown so much, right? You have your VDC, you now have robotics and drones and all of these. And quite honestly, you don't need to tie all of those back to BIM, but you can, right? You can, because there is model integration and there's a lot of cohesion in terms of comparison. So all of those things kind of work together. But students won't get that context just by watching a 2-minute video, right? You have to bring some form of a contextual understanding of, okay, try and picture this, guys, guys, gals, what are we trying to do here? So that has helped, I think, because I see my students interact with those. I'm like, okay, now we get it, and when I have some interactions with students also, I think they kind of begin to then broaden their mind of, okay, this is how it all works. So from a construction education standpoint, I do truly believe that we need to do a better job of contextualizing things. If not, what's going to happen is the industry's requirements from labor and all these things are far outpacing what we can supply, right? And not only are we outpacing in terms of numbers, I think we're outpacing in terms of skill, right? And in today's context, I think skill is truly tied back to understanding, right? And our assumption that understanding is done through a 45-minute video where you can click fast forward or, do a 5-question quiz, I think is also misguided, right? So the question is, how do we improve that? I think it's partially industry-based internal mentorship, right? And I think internal mentorship requires contextual training of those who are learning. Okay, why is this relevant? How is this important? Because a lot of our students today are super smart, extremely smart, right? I mean, they'll run around circles around me when I was in college, right? They're super, super intelligent. I think the biggest challenge, though, is where we're trying to now, their intelligence and their access to information also increases their demand for context.
Why we're doing it.
Exactly, right? Because I can research and study things all day long, and I'll have a whole load of information, but if I don't understand the why, my implementation will be incorrect, right? And this is not just in construction technology, it's project management as well. So I think the construction professional of today, or the younger professional that's coming from the education to the industry piece, I think there is a fair expectation on their end to understand context. And I think there's a fair demand that we need to provide that to them, because that's the only way we will fix the skill gap that we're so concerned about, right? It's not only the schools that are responsible for it, we in industry also are, right?
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I think that this generation and generations behind them, they're really looking for the why of why they're doing it. Why are they learning? What is this? How is this impacting things? And I think it's definitely our responsibility to push that. But I think there's a big need also for technology companies like Procore, Autodesk, and others to help with that. I know one of the challenges we have is learning how to read blueprints or drawings. And I think it would be great if, Procore offers a student version of videos to learn, but I don't think that they offer anything in terms of here's a license for students to use to learn the software before they graduate from college. They could, maybe they get that in their internship. But I'd like to see, other software companies really allow that, free access to them to be able to use that and allow the teachers to take that technology and learn those skills through the products.
And to that point, I think Proco has started marching down the direction, because actually right now in my course, students have to get project PM certified. Right. Now, I have seen some additional modules for building information modeling and such, right? I also have fellow faculty members at Georgia Southern who have explored other educational tools that seem to have some pre-made modules for drawings. But now that's more on the design heavy side. So they look at CAD and Revit, right? So where is that intermingling, right, for the mid-tier, like construction students, right? Okay, well, project management is, we're all the way embedded in actually running this thing. And then in some of these other tools, you have the design aspect. But there is that mid piece of, again, context, right? Okay, we take the design and we have to contextually build it, right? It doesn't just build itself, right? There's jurisdictional issues, there are issues that are code related. Right now, of course, we trust our design team to kind of work through the code aspect of it, give us that direction. But now when you're building it, you have jurisdictional challenges that you have to work through, or, there might be specific site issues or logistics issues, right? So now all of those things are coming up. So how do you view the drawings now from that lens, right? And I think trying to open students' eyes to that would be interesting. So I agree with you. I think software companies and other potential, innovators and vendors need to try and see how best they can improve on that side of things. Not saying it doesn't exist. I think there's just a lot more work to be done.
Yeah, and it's really just down to the basics. Talking about drawings, how do I look at the drawing index, get to a specific sheet? Once I'm on that specific sheet, how do I get to a detail or a call out? And then after that, that's the understanding. So education teaching the basics of the navigation of the plan, and then industry coming in and teaching what you're actually seeing within those things. Because I think that is always so challenging. We talk about in our internship program where a lot of the challenges that we see is nobody knows how to put an RFI together. Nobody knows how to review a submittal, but yet that's what we require them to do coming straight out of college. And it's a really important aspect of our industry. Talk about your experience with that and how we can help.
So I love that you brought that up, because quite honestly, when you publish this episode, it's also going to be featured in my course. And my course requirement is that I don't respond to student emails unless it is formatted in an RFI format. Right. Now, I'm glad someone else said it, so that it's not only their teacher kind of saying, hey, all we do is RFIs and submittals when we start off in industry. So I want you to learn it. And it's interesting because I think two things I've observed. Students have a lot better contextual understanding when they structure their questions by reviewing the material in the course, right? Which is what we do in an RFI, right? We do a thorough scrub of the drawings, the specs, context of what we're doing, and then we draft a question with a proposed answer, right? That's the process, right? And then your submittals are comparisons to see, okay, hey, are we building per the spec, per the drawings? Okay, hey, this is our understanding and interpretation. Hey, we just found out that this specified product is no longer being manufactured. Now, that's the due diligence process that we're trying to teach people, right? And I'm glad you said that, because for any of my students watching this episode, now you know why I ask you to do an RFI question when you have a question in the course. But outside of that, even recently at RICON for our younger professionals, and then we kind of opened a session for drawing readings, right? And you're absolutely right. I actually did a presentation called The Layered Cake, right? And because that's what I interpret. So you can see I'm a very context-based guy. Like I'm paraboling everything, right? If I can. So I call the drawings the layered cake because there's so much information and you kind of have to explore, right? There's a lot of structure behind the icing and the prettiness that the owner finally wants, right? And that flavor, but none of that matters if we haven't got the structure right. We didn't burn the sponge to begin with, right? So there's so much work, the specs, the detailing, how all of this goes, what structure holds what. So drawings are just like that. Drawings and specs are layered cake, right? And the more you kind of understand how all these things work together, the more of an appreciation you have for that process, right? Because I think I have a lot of students who sometimes like, well, the drawings say it, the specs say it, right? No, absolutely right, and that's contractually that's how we build. But to be really a better builder, I think it's important to also, as a student, young professional, senior professional, whatever step you are, is to ask the additional question, okay, well, how does this contextually relate? Yeah, the drawings and the specs, that's what generates questions that can help us save on schedule, save on cost, because now we are contextually evaluating what we're building. Right? We're not just taking that piece of paper and just going and building it. Now, contractually, that's what we're supposed to do, and that's what we do, because our expectation is that someone else thought about it. But if we look at it from a team perspective, we're all responsible for this. We have to make sure that our owner receives a good product, right? And that means we ask good questions during the process. Sometimes we may think, well, we shouldn't ask, we should be knowing this, right? Well, the reality of it is every individual context or every individual instance is a different project, different lens, different perspective, different experience. I mean, there's countless examples. I have one with Evercam as well that I can share, but it's just understanding the whole, right? And it's okay not to know, and it's perfectly okay to ask.
Right. And it goes back to that, ultimate question about RFIs, that you ask the question specifically of what you're trying to get out of it. And that technical writing leads all the way into what designers do with specifications. We instruct everybody that this is the written instructions to the drawings. So you got the drawings that are more visual, and you got the specs that are the written instructions. And if those things are not clear, it's our responsibility to ask that question of the design team to make it more clear for us to actually.
Absolutely.
So I think just on that whole note is just getting more of that technology, whether it's Procore, to the students' hands to learn the basics of how to navigate. It always will be our responsibility on the outside to teach them, okay, here's the detail. Now let's go out in the field and actually see that detail. And I'm going to show you, here's the actual detail on paper, and this is what it looks like in reality. Because one of the other things that frustrates me is that they'll spend too much time doing the paperwork side of it, and they never get out to the field to see that submittal get put in place. What does that piece of equipment look like? How does that interrelate to the bigger ideal? How does that relate to where you're at in your career and education?
You cut out a little bit.
I said, how does that relate to project management like today, and then coming from education as well? How do we help that process?
Yeah, I love that you asked that, because I have been mooting the idea that construction technology is really an opportunity to help fix this, right? Photo albums that are static in 2D are great, right? I remember when my dad had to do a pretty large project, right? One of the conditions of project management on that project for him, and this was maybe 15 something years ago, the owner required that my father actually has physical eyes on the job site, right? And the job site was extremely far. It was in the northern part of Sri Lanka. We live southwest, So my father was trying to kind of figure out, okay, how do we address this? So I remember him taking a drawing and numbering different shots in sequence so that he can visually imagine when his superintendent takes a picture, this is what picture 1 looks like, this is what picture 34 looks like, so he can fully do that in his head. Great. I have a hard time doing that, right? But my father, I'm so happy to be his son. He had the skill and ability to do that, right? And now we have 360 photo documentation, right? Which can assess things from a location, right? Which now gives us more visibility. We need to be leveraging tools like that not solely just for risk management and owner visibility, but also for teaching our folks, right? Hey, look at where we were when we were framing. Look at where we are when we started putting these different layers of drywall. Look at when we started taping and mudding it and finishing it and all these different processes in sequence. Look at the exterior framing. Look at when the waterproofing went, right? Look at how we were, like, now compare that information to the drawing. So even I'm a strong advocate for people going to the job site and seeing, right? I myself try to visit my job sites as often as I can because sometimes you just can't picture it unless you see it, right? However, I do think that tools like 360 photo documentation and these other assets that we have need to be viewed as a teaching tool for our professionals as much as it is a tool for risk mitigation, process evaluation, progress monitoring, and all that, right? So when you talk about, okay, how is that changed? I think we have more tools now than 6 years ago that are so much more advanced for our students and our professionals to be able to really push the ability to understand and comprehend what's going on. I was I kind of give myself a tap on the shoulder. I was an A student in my construction program, right? And I thought I know a lot of stuff now. I grew up in construction. I did this. I was a construction business development and operations guy in Sri Lanka. So I probably have a good understanding of this, right? And there were things on drawings that were horizontal elements that were vertical on the job site. And, unless you actually see the detail and comprehend what this material is and how it's going and how it attaches, you really don't get it, right? And that's okay. That's okay, but you need to know how to pursue that knowledge or that understanding. And I think that's kind of the key here. And I think things like BIM, things like 360 photo documentation that are location specific, right? I think all of that allows for us to do that better. The question I ask is, why are we, we're so caught up on, oh, well, that's only for the owner to see. Do we really need that tool if the owner doesn't buy it? In my opinion, yeah, you can weigh the budget merits of it, but at the same time, if we're talking about talent not having a good understanding, well, maybe we should leverage that for training our folks. Maybe that's going to be the value, right? That's the value proposition.
Yeah, because that's the thing with a lot of these buildings. They're getting more and more complicated. It's not one of those things where it's the basis of certain elements coming together. It's really complex systems that are tying together, and a lot of them were never meant to come together. And I think the design, even the younger designers, are having a hard time trying to understand, okay, this is what I want it to look like, but does that really work in real life? And I think that's going to be a big piece. I like where you're going with that. We're using the technology not just for the use case for this particular project, but it's more of like a lessons learned type thing, and learning from those different things as the job progresses. Which leads me into this. We talk a lot about tech deployment and that return on investment, but I think you got a little bit different take on that return on investment.
Oh, absolutely, man. I think that's what I'm getting branded for now is, my ROI is return on implementation all day, right? If you don't practice, you don't know how to use it. That's just my perspective on it, right? Same thing with Proco. All of a sudden, from a managerial standpoint, we're like, oh, well, we're using Proco, right? This should fix everything. Well, no. We have to practice. We have to teach. We have to learn. We have to fail, and then really figure out what this cycle of use is. And I think I am really proud that at Rycon, we take a lot of intentional steps with assessing what we're doing, how do we improve. We have some folks who are focused on training and development, trying to work on that. And I've seen a lot of our peer GCs, especially at the larger scale where Rycon sits and beyond, working on things like that to make sure that there's a lot of training and development, right? To make sure that, okay, if we are seeing a cyclical issue with this particular use case, how do we pivot to make it better, right? And that's the whole philosophy around return on implementation, right? I keep my general note is, when you go and tell a client, hey, I'm using a laptop, right? They'll be like, cool, all right, great to know, right? There is no justification of the return on using this device for the benefit of their project, right? Maybe 10 years ago, we probably would have said that, Oh yeah, we're using laptops. Oh, okay, not desktops. Now they have laptops, right? I remember there was this a time, and probably about 7, 8 years ago, where there was a big conversation. Oh, we now use iPads on the field. Yeah, that makes sense. It's a sellable point, right? But do we care now? No, not really, right? You have an iPad, a cell phone, like, okay, you can access the information. So why are you telling me this? That was your sales pitch 10 years ago, not relevant today, right? Just like that, a lot of these construction technology tools, 360 photo documentations, job site cameras, any type of workflow and schedule analysis, and quite honestly, to a certain extent, I think even AI tools further down the road are going to be like, okay, why is this new information? Why are you telling me this? Right? I expect you to use it if it helps you make your job run smoother. I don't need to know about it, right? So I think the return on investment conversation is a very old managerial term in my perspective, right? I'm not saying it's not important, right? So let me preface that. I'm not saying that a return on investment does not need to be justified. I'm just saying that if you solely focus on return on investment, you are never going to implement because you will always be stuck on the numbers. You just won't have an idea of when you're going to get the return. And guess what? While you are thinking, someone else is already outpacing, right? So, like, if you haven't figured out that we need to practice, figure how this works, train our folks, 5 years from now or sooner, we'd probably be on another episode of BIM Heroes talking about how we're still having a training gap, right? And we're like, yeah, it's because we didn't train our folks when it came out, right? We waited 4 years and then we started implementing stuff and we're already behind, right? So I think return on implementation for me is solely a promotion of the idea that it's important that when we talk ROI, it's extremely critical that our folks understand that there is a cycle to this. You're not going to get dollars on day one, right? You just need to have a plan on how you're trying to push those dollars. I am all about doing the due diligence evaluation of when you're going to get a traditional ROI, right? But I think if you're thinking, oh, yeah, we're not going to do it because we don't see the numbers right now, quite honestly, we don't know the use cases of some of these things. I mean, I'm talking about education through BIM models and virtual design and construction. Did we know that 8 years ago? Not really, right? We were solely trying to coordinate, right? We were trying to sell models and, or rather, the idea of 3D visualization, right? But we thought of the 3D visualization in context of fixing our issues, not what additional things we can do with it, right? Now we have come to an area where people are talking about digital twinning. Well, what's the baseline of that? You have something that's 3D, that's visualized, that's having real-time communication. Well, okay, in order to go to digital twin, you need to start somewhere with some form of 3D infrastructure, right? Just like that, we never thought of the digital twin or the facility management use case when we started first promoting BIM, right? And I think there's more to come, right? Who knows? I mean, after the 3D, we immediately started talking about 4D modeling, 5D modeling, 6D. So all of a sudden, all these different use cases were improving. Did we use them from day one? No. Do we know that we can use them? Yes. So there's value in the potential, right? I mean, you and I have cell phones, our managers, everyone has cell phones, right? Do we use everything on a cell phone? No, right? We predominantly use it for texting and calling, right? But now we've used it for emails, and I mean, production is out the, we were like, wow, and now we have to scale it back and say, all right, guys, when you go home, we get that your email comes on the phone, just set it aside for your sanity, take a break, right? We're at that level, right? But I think we can draw parallels in terms of return on investment and implementation, talking about in order to figure out the best use cases, you have to practice with it. If not, you'll never figure it out.
And, talking through that, do you see positives and negatives starting to form in the analytics of it all? So now you start to see some of these products, now that you're getting data from the last 10, 15, 20 years, now you're starting to see products that are starting to analytically look at the industry and trying to break it down to see where the positive and negatives might be performance.
Yeah, and I think we still haven't fully unlocked the data science piece of the construction technology and the data we collect, right? So we collect this data. We don't have as many analytic tools, right? And quite honestly, that's where I personally think AI is going to win, right? For us as an industry. I think AI is going to be the perfect asset for now, right? Who knows what will come up in the future. But I think AI will be that big win of being able to review our data, analyze it, and give us a certain potential outcomes or options, or better decision making information, right? I will say this though, I have noticed AI both in the industry and outside is inherently biased based on the data that's given, right? So if we don't fix the right data going into AI generating different options and crunching different numbers, our outcome and potential decision making is going to be bad to begin with, right? So there's a lot of important focus that needs to be done on figuring out how to screen, clean, and make sure that the data we're feeding any type of AI models is relevant, right? Now, talking about the positives, negatives, I think there are many positives that once you're able to figure out the data science piece, I do think you're going to have a lot of positive outcomes because your decisions are going to be more informed, right? Now, can you always plan for a COVID, plan for a different type of I don't know, some form of jurisdictional issue? The answer is no, right? Now, maybe AI can get the historic relevance and say, yeah, while we are suggesting this proposition based on the data that was inputted, please note that you had COVID from this span to this span, the project location was here. So now it's giving you a colorful picture of what other data points you need to be considering that may or may not impact your decision, right? And I think that's the positive trajectory. Now, the negative trajectory, right? I think AI is also being very loosely used now. Everything's an AI tool, right? And what's terrible about everything being an AI tool is AI scares people inherently, right? It scares me, and I'm a contact advocate, right? So I think it's very important to kind of take a reeler back and say, okay, what does AI really mean when we're pushing this as a message? And not only what does it mean, how are we utilizing it? What are we doing now? I'll give you an example with Evercam, right? I think we did. So we're using gate reports on my project, right? The initial thesis or the initial understanding was I have to move X amount of dirt. I want to see how fast we're moving the dirt, and I want to see whether it's in sync with our designated schedule, right? Now, reality hits. There have been some jurisdictional challenges with permit time and things like that, which have made us have to resequence, change the schedule. But the baseline question remains the same. Are we moving dirt? How quick are we moving it, right? And can we bring it in alignment with our schedule, right? The question remains the same. Situation has changed. Now, recently we started moving dirt at a rapid case, and there was a mismatch between the data that we identified on our site reports versus what the camera was showing, right? And it was vastly different, right? I think we showed about 19 trucks on the gate report, and we had moved out about 85 trucks, right? So huge difference. So of course, I appreciate Evercam for being ever so willing to kind of hop on and discuss and kind of troubleshoot and figure out where we're headed. So we did a deep dive into that day, right? Now, initially, when we planned this project, we went with the process of, hey, camera positioning, really planning out how do we make sure we maximize this, right? And come to find out, there are 2 or 3 data points that we planned for that seem to have backfired in this particular instance. We didn't recognize that the road where the truck is entering is at an angle. So it doesn't read the license plate as well as it should, right? Secondarily, on the front end, we were reviewing so many things, to kind of plan it out. And we're like, well, the state of Georgia, our license plates are at the back, right? Whereas other states have license plates in the front, or in some cases, front and back, right? So when I had brought that up to Evercam said, oh, yeah, we recognize that all our deployments are actually in states where license plates are not exclusively at the back. So we had to plan a completely different strategy of how we were going to position cameras. So we came up with a plan, we did it, and until we actually ran the reports and Evercam ran and analyzed it a few weeks ago, we didn't realize that dump trucks in Georgia and I haven't verified this, but the dump trucks that have been coming to my job site all have the license plates in front, right? Now, would I know that if we didn't try to implement it? No, right? So now we know that, okay, there's this additional question that we have to ask. Hey, the dump trucks that are coming to the job site, is the license plate in the front or the back? It's like a additional thing that you don't think you need to plan for, or you don't need. So of course, Evercam and Rycon are working together here on one of our Atlanta projects to try and see how we can mitigate or come up with a solution to make sure we're still getting the data we need, right? Because what is the baseline? The baseline is still those three questions, right? At what pace are we moving the dirt? How many trucks, and is it in alignment with the schedule, right? So that hasn't changed, right? That's what we're trying to answer here. But in the meantime of planning and setting everything up, right? We've again, bad data, right? So your solution and planning doesn't have the best outcome. So now we have to work together to figure out, okay, how do we resolve that? So going back to kind of return on investment and implementation, I think that also kind of ties in when we're talking about different technology solutions and how we roll it out and implement it, right? All of this kind of needs to be considered or thought about.
We had a very similar situation, but it was in terms of concrete deliveries. We had a concrete structure that we wanted to match production. In that particular case, it's the same type of idea, not looking at per se the license plates, but at that time, when it was really early, it was looking at the actual types of trucks that were coming. But if you had other trucks that came in front of it, it would block that sense of AI to be able to see how long that the truck was actually. So I think the analytics side is there, but the positioning of the camera or the collection device, that's what's lacking behind, and it'll get there. But I do think that analytics is going to be a major part of what AI is going to jump into, and it's going to take the information that we have collected in Procore and other collection project management devices, and it's going to start to put that into a system that allows you to have a go no go decision on your projects going forward to be more profitable to the future.
Yeah, no, and I agree 100%. And to kind of somewhat take it full circle to my dining room and dining table example, right? You're now really looking at that intelligent form that was sitting on a software, really being the analyzer to decide, okay, do I eat this meal off the table or not, right? It's like, okay, do we really engage it? Do we not? Like, do we pass on it, right? So absolutely, I think the analytics aspect of it is where AI is definitely where we need to be guiding it. And making sure that AI really gives us outcomes in that area. Without a doubt, 100% agreed.
Yeah, and I think right now we're at the project level, and I think it's working its way to take all that data up to the point in which business development would even sit down with senior leadership and say, yeah, this is a project we're going to pursue. And it makes analytically, it makes sense, not just a good feeling that the team has. It's like, this is backed up by data, and it's not just one project, but it's subs that are going to work on that project. It's the type of person that we're working with. It's the client in general. It's the industry in general. I think that's where we're going. I think that's the positive nature of AI. But there is, like you said, a lot of fear that it's going to take a lot of jobs in general. And how do we tamp that fear and maybe position ourselves to make sure that we're educating the new generation of where to go in the industry? And that leads me to the final question, which is, where do you see the future of project management technology?
Yeah, so I think project management technology in the workforce is going to be, and I like that it kind of led in from the fear of AI, right? I think in fact, one of my friends, one of my best friends who's out of industry, we were talking recently about AI and how, AI kind of plays its part and its role. And we were having a conversation about, as we kind of ascend and grow in our careers, how, do we really want to assess and figure out whether someone has a skill set to work in tandem with AI, right? We have a lot of different employment and tests of how our brain functions and all these things, and what your skill set is, and resume reviews and all that. But there is a new contender here. There is an AI aspect to how we work, right? Now, I think AI is a just like BIM or anything else that our industry has sometimes been afraid of to leverage. I don't think it's a job replacer. I think it's a job enhancer, right? We're talking about lack of understanding in terms of how we approach projects. And we had a huge exodus from the industry with the recession, right? With the huge knowledge bank that left, so we're trying to also fix that gap. There are so many different items that really need to be addressed. So, and we're going to have more exoduses here in the coming future, right? But that's where we're even projecting that we don't have enough people coming into the industry. So in order to plan ahead, well, what do? We try and leverage AI to be somewhat a gatekeeper of that information and data, right? That knowledge. How do we capture that? Well, there's a plethora of strategies, ways we need to do that. But the more we leverage these tools on projects where we have superstar superintendents, project managers, project executives who have a lot of contextual knowledge, information, data, we are enriching our decision-making ability with this project enhancing technology, or profession enhancing, not profession replacing, profession enhancing tool of artificial intelligence, right? Now, again, fully understanding it's inherently biased and all of that, right? But we're not trying to fix all those issues, because guess what? When we deal with a single person on a day-to-day on a project, there is an inherent bias, and that's okay, right? It's up to the managers and those who are making decisions to recognize that there are inherent biases, and we need to navigate through it, right? So we shouldn't be afraid of implementing just because we're afraid of, oh, well, AI is going to be stagnant data. No, AI is an element that's going to continually improve and grow. But let's try and collect and improve our data bank, right? For the improvement of how we do business. Now, talking about AI replacing the workforce, I often tell people that you just like you walk a dog, right? In this case, we'll treat the dog as artificial intelligence, right? The dog should never walk you, right? You walk the dog. Just like that, our profession should never think that AI is going to walk us, right? We have to govern AI, right? But in order to do that, you have to understand the beast here, right? If you don't understand AI, guess what? You're never going to walk the AI. AI will always govern you, right? So I think when we're talking about mitigating this concern of fear, I think it's important that folks begin to understand that we need to learn more about AI, understand what it does, understand both the bad sides and the good, right? That's how you govern it, right? A dog can bite, right? Doesn't mean that you don't get a dog and consider it man's best friend, right? You're trying to understand the dog, what its emotions and feelings are. Well, yeah, just like a dog has an intelligence, here you have AI which has an intelligence, right? And I think that's the mindset we need to go to. Now, the bigger issue, I think, is we have a lack of time to do that learning and investigation, right? We don't sufficiently have time to invest in understanding how AI operates, right? So we watch a 2-minute clip here, a 1-minute clip there. We hear someone at the office say, "Oh my God, AI does this," and you type something on Copilot, and Copilot shares something scary about your past, and you're like, "Oh my God, this is what AI is," right? And you've branded AI. But I think it's important to recognize that even your method of research and training and learning also has biases, right? Because your YouTube search history may show you only certain videos, right? So trying to recognize that there's a broader picture. I think we always have to remember, regardless of what information we consume, we have to remember that there is another side of the coin, right? It's not a one-sided coin in anything, right? And I think be it in just project management, in technology, in AI, in anything we do, we need to recognize, right? We don't need to accept, we just need to recognize that there is a different story, right? And if we care enough to understand or listen or even just hear out the other side of the story, I think we will be better governors of AI. And I think that's the missing part here is self-recognition, self-understanding, and really self-governance in how am I interpreting these things. Just because you hear AI, don't shut the door, because guess what? Maybe you're at the tail end of your career. Maybe you're, going to retire in 10 years and you're like, well, yeah, this doesn't matter. By the time I'm out of the industry, it'll be not relevant, right? But the issue is you may have impacted the generation that follows you, because now they're stuck with trying to learning and figure it out. And you, as the knowledgeable person, has left the industry. So we don't even have your knowledge, right? So for the benefit of the industry, I think it's important to not be, the front end champion of AI, right? I know at Rycon we are careful, we are very calculated with our approaches on construction technology use. But I think it's also important as we take those steps that we understand, okay, yeah, this is coming. We just need to understand how this is going to shape what we do.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good final point that I'll make is that generation that's going to retire, maybe they stay on as like an advisor, not, let's say, the 80 to 100 hours a week or 60 hours a week that they traditionally do, but let that generation assist as long as they can for as long as they want. But also on the other side of that, the younger generations, learning from that and teaching them about where all this technology is going. And it's a two-way street. Because I know when I always talk to people about this, as long as, even if I retire, I still want to be connected to the industry in some way and have that commitment back to them. So,
and that's a very good point. I just want to kind of circle back to what you said on that. I recently heard someone talk about using 360 documentation and leveraging that for safety audits, right? And how I asked them, well, how do you plan to do that? Oh, well, we're planning on getting some retired superintendents to review. And I was like, oh, it's a great way, great use case, right? So they're going to I almost, you perfectly kind of hit the point there. I think people who retire, maybe they need to be some form of like construction technology auditors almost, right? And maybe that's where we govern, and that's probably a great idea to kind of have is, okay, as you retire, yeah, bring that knowledge back and cross-check this tool, right? And I think there's value there, because once you cross-check a tool, then you help also negate some of these biases and things that we're talking about. So, hey, you may have just created an entire new profession of construction technology auditors, but we only accept 65 plus.
That's right. Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where it's what you want to do in retirement, right? Obviously, there's some that have worked 40, 50 years of their life, and they're like, when I walk out the door, that's it for me. I've put my time in, I've done that. But there's a ton of people that I know that want to continue to be more of an advisor, and they'll always be there as long as they're here. And I think that we need to have those conversations more with that generation, so that they see that there's still an avenue for them, and they're not just waiting for the inevitable. So, because I think that will go a long way both ways. Well, Dylan, I want to thank you for joining me on this BIM Heroes podcast. I loved the conversation and wanted to continue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for having me. Greatly appreciated and loved it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.